Coming up, the fire-breathing, blood-spitting icons of rock didn't want the song that became their band's biggest hit in America to be included on their album. In fact, they hated it so much that they didn't even show up at the studio when it was recorded. The saga behind the People's Choice for Favorite Song in 1977 is coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever played the drums on your steering wheel or your dashboard while you're driving, great song plays over your car speakers, you're going to dig this channel. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. Check the box, notification box, so you always know when our newest interviews, exclusive interviews, stories behind the songs are coming out. We also have a Patreon that you're going to want to check out. There you're going to find an additional catalog of exclusive content. You can even become an honorary producer to help us curate this music history. Very important. The Kiss Army expected their masked heroes to deliver unbridled rock anthems and outrageous live shows with smoking guitars, pyrotechnics, and levitating drum kits. They wanted to rock and roll all night and party every day, as it were. The last thing that fans expected from Kiss was a tender ballad. But when AM radio discovered Beth as a B-side, Kiss's record label had to fuel the fire, move quickly by making the melancholy love song the fourth single from the Destroyer album in 1976. The success of the ballad surprised everybody. It became the band's biggest American hit, and it paved the way for a long string of power rock ballads that would follow. First of all, Beth was a reworking of a song titled Beck. It was written by Kiss original drummer Peter Criss and Stan Pendridge. When the two musicians were in Chelsea, a group based in New York City that sounded more like the Moody Blues than a heavy rock band. Pendridge and Criss wrote Beck as a way to razz their Chelsea bandmate Mike Brand, who was constantly being hounded by his overbearing wife named Becky, or Beck for short. Beck would frequently call, studio phone while the band was rehearsing to check on her husband and find out when he was going to come home. That's where the opening line for this song came from. Beth, I hear you calling, but I can't come home right now. Pendridge claims the lyrics mimicked word for word the way that Brand responded to his wife when she phoned the studio and interrupted the band's rehearsal. For several days, Pendridge whipped out a small notebook and scribbled down Brand's replies. He called the notebook his wizard book and carried it with him, wherever he went. Whenever Pendridge heard someone say something that he thought could be clever for a song lyric, he would just jot it down in his wizard book. Peter Criss and Stan Pendridge were friends when they were in Chelsea, but alas, when Pendridge died in 2000, their relationship was purely contentious, rife with legal and personal conflicts. We'll tune into that soap opera a little bit later, but in 1975, Kiss put their plan in place for the making of their fourth album, Destroyer. Kiss hired Bob Ezrin, who had been working with Alice Cooper to produce Destroyer, believing that Ezrin was the ideal person to help him elevate their sound to that next level and maintain the commercial success that they achieved with the Alive album that was released just a year earlier. The band had composed and recorded a 15-song demo just prior to Ezrin coming on board. Ezrin reviewed the demo and rejected most of what he heard, actually. Only reconstructed versions of God of Thunder and Detroit Rock City. Parts from a few others were rescued from that demo. Ezrin took his role very seriously with Kiss, not settling for any songs that he didn't think were very strong, and establishing a strict, disciplined work regimen. During the recording sessions for Destroyer, Ezrin enforced numerous tactics formulated to improve the quality of the music that Kiss recorded. Since none of the four members of Kiss were trained musicians, Ezrin stopped the sessions at one point to teach lessons on basic music theory. He also wore a whistle around his neck, and he scolded the band by blowing the whistle whenever he thought that the band was slipping up. He would yell out to the group, "Campers, we're here to work." If you can imagine, that's like a volleyball coach or something. Paul Stanley compared the experience of working with Ezrin as musical boot camp, but he said that the band came out a lot smarter for it. There was even one occasion where Gene Simmons stopped the playback of a recording, and Bob Ezrin yelled out at him, "Don't you ever stop a take unless I tell you." Like his bandmate, Simmons applauded Ezrin's firm hand. He stated that it was exactly what we needed at that time. Ezrin opened up the palette for Kiss, introducing them to sound effects, strings, screaming children, reverse drum beats, and even a children's choir. Ezrin believed in the power of a children's choir on a rock record, as you'll remember. He brought in that key component for the recording of School's Out with Alice Cooper. Of course, later with Pink Floyd on their epic #1 smash, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. It was during a fateful limo ride that Peter Criss sang a fast-paced version of Beck for Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. Peter assumed they would not be interested in including a soppy ballad on the album. Simmons and Stanley suggested that he sing it to producer Ezrin. Now, before we get into all of that and break that down, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. The best glasses ever. Right now at Zenni.com, you can design your own pair of glasses however you want, the color, the size, the shape, and you can add great features like blue blocks, and that protects your eyes from digital blue light that we look at every day on our screens. And you can do all this for less than the price of a 2 vinyl record set. Check it out today. Criss and Pendridge actually recorded a demo of what was still titled Beck. Criss gave the demo to Ezrin, who agreed to record and assured him that it would be a success. Ezrin's decision was motivated by the fact that Kiss's other songs were primarily about sex, and he believed that Beck was a love song that everyone would relate to, especially women. When Ezrin reviewed the demo that became Beth, the track had a much different tone than the one that was developed for Destroyer. Ezrin took the demo for the song back to his apartment, and he composed a piano figure that gave the musical arrangement a sweeter, more romantic mood. Next order of business, though, was reconvening with Criss and Pendridge to revive the song lyrically, taking the cockiness out of the song and softening it up with a feeling of sadness and loneliness, which they pulled off perfectly. Beth, I hear you calling. Kiss songs were always about sexual situations, and Ezrin thought they needed a tune that everyone could relate to in a very personal way. The title of the song needed to be changed as well. No one liked Beck, especially Gene Simmons, who for some reason, he was worried that people would think that the song was about guitarist Jeff Beck. I'm scratching my head on that one. That doesn't really make sense to me. But the name Beck could be easily mistaken. They decided to change that title to Beth and remove the brashness of an initial line that read, "I know you love complaining, but Beck, what can I do?" to "I think I hear them calling. Oh, Beth, what can I do? Beth, what can I do?" Peter Criss is credited as co-writer of Beth, along with Pendridge and Ezrin, but there's much dispute on who was the primary author of the song. Even Peter Criss's first wife, Lydia, claims to have had a role in composing the song, that she had the idea to change the name of the track to Beth. Lydia Criss stated in an interview that she deserves the credit for coming up with the name Beth, actually. According to Lydia, she suggested Beth because she was thinking of the head of Casablanca Records, Neil Bogart's wife at the time, the former Beth Weiss. Interestingly, Beck Brand, who the first version of the song was named after, had a twin sister, and so did Beth Weiss. Lydia also contends that the second verse in the revised Beth, "You say you feel so empty that our house just ain't a home," that was based on the relationship that she and Peter had back then. You say you feel so empty. Lydia recollects working hard on her marriage with Peter, supporting her husband financially before he started making money as a member of Kiss. When Lydia stopped working and wasn't the breadwinner, she said to Peter, "I feel so empty. I feel like this house isn't even my home." And Peter put those words of despair into the song. That our house
house just ain't a home.
Criss has, in fact, expressed that the second verse in Beth was indeed written about Lydia. You say you feel so empty that her house just ain't a home, and I'm always somewhere else, and you're always there alone.
And you're always there alone.
Peter and Lydia were still a couple when Beth emerged as a hit, but their relationship turned stormy when Criss began an affair with Deborah Jensen, who was a Playboy centerfold in 1978. The Crisses divorced the next year in 79, and Peter and Deborah Jensen were later married. The relationship between Stan Pendridge and Peter Criss, that also went south following the success of Beth. When Stan Pendridge was interviewed about who really came up with Beck in the first place, he was adamant that Peter Criss had absolutely nothing to do with the song's conception. I believe his exact quote was, "It was another poor man's copyright by me in '70. Pendridge co-penned and played guitar on most of the tracks on Peter Criss's solo album, Out of Control, that came out in '80, and Criss was the best man at Stan's wedding, so pretty tough there. But the Pendridge-Criss brotherhood, it dissolved for good when Pendridge filed a lawsuit claiming that he was owed money for songs that he co-wrote on Out of Control. It's a very unfortunate end to a once close friendship of more than 20 years.
Trouble will find me. It always has.
It's no secret that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley loathed Beth. The late Bill O'Coin, former manager of Kiss, explained that Beth was such a big departure from the band's sound, the two co-leaders of Kiss tried to keep it from being included on the album Destroyer. But O'Coin and Ezrin's insistent belief in the song's merit was the deciding factor. At the very last minute, Beth was added as a cut on Destroyer. When Ezrin began the sessions to record Beth, Stanley and Simmons didn't even bother to show up at the studio. Neither did Ace Frehley. Peter Criss was the only member of Kiss who attended the recording sessions for Beth. Criss delivered the lead vocal, who else would have, which was the first time that he was the featured vocalist on a Kiss single at that point. But he would later do the honors on, of course, Hard Luck Woman, which was the lead single from Kiss's fifth studio album, Rock and Roll All Over.
You'll be a hard luck woman, baby, till you find your man.
Criss's gravelly yet convincingly heartfelt vocal on Beth, really great. That was backed by a recording of piano, horns, and string combo, which was another brainchild of Bob Ezrin. Ezrin brought in members of the New York Philharmonic to create the orchestral sounds on Beth, and he enlisted Dick Wagner to play the gentle acoustic guitar parts to substitute for Ace Frehley. Wagner was a highly sought-after musician, session man who played on records for everybody from Lou Reed to Alice Cooper and Aerosmith, most notably. It was rumored that Frehley didn't participate in the recording of Beth, not because he hated the song, but he was actually wrapped up in a poker game with some friends. Once the Philharmonic arrived at the studio, Bob Ezrin, ever the taskmaster, he had all 25 musicians wear fake tuxedos and made Criss wear his trademark makeup for the press photos. Ezrin joined in on the fun by putting on a top hat and playing a grand piano during the filming of the recording session at the famed Record Plant Studios in New York City. Ultimately, Beth was the only Kiss song to have no instrumentals performed by any other member of the group.
Beth, what can I do?
After strong opening sales for Destroyer steadily declined through the run of the first three singles, Shout It Out Loud, Flaming Youth, and Detroit Rock City, respectively, the B-side for Detroit Rock City was Beth. The thinking was that Beth was so different from other Kiss tracks, it would get buried and force radio DJs to play the hard-driving Detroit Rock City, a quintessential Kiss song if there ever was one. Now, before the release of Detroit Rock City, the aforementioned Neil Bogart, president of Kiss's label Casablanca Records, he gave the order to make Beth the B-side to Detroit Rock City, to reduce the chances of getting airplay. It actually ended up blowing up in his face. Even though renowned radio programmer Scott Shannon told Bogart that Beth was the real hit on Destroyer, Bogart told Shannon to forget it because he felt the song was only included on the album as a favorite of Peter Criss. Plus, he disliked Beth because it was his then ex-wife's name, and the song's lyrics seemed to reflect the drama that was surrounding the divorce.
I'm always somewhere else.
After issuing his directive, Bogart went on vacation, and while he was gone, he was out of the States. Detroit Rock City backed With Beth. That was distributed to radio stations.
Everybody's gonna move their feet. Get down, everybody's gonna leave their seat.
To the astonishment of Kiss and Kiss's label Casablanca Records, DJs were choosing to play Beth instead of Detroit Rock City. Actually, any spin of Beth immediately led to the song becoming one of the most requested by the listeners in that station. When Bogart returned from his trip and was appraised of the uprising of Beth, he had no choice but to accept the situation, since the song was quickly becoming one of the nation's hottest new buzz records at Top 40. Consequently, in August of '76, Beth officially became the 4th single from Destroyer and took off across America like no other Kiss single had before or after. I mean, the popularity of Beth was so palpable. It re-energized Destroyer at record stores. It elevated the LP to double platinum status. Beth moved all the way up to number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it sold over 1,045,000. Far and away, Kiss's biggest chart hit in the US. Single also went to number 5 in Canada, and it broke the top 10 in other parts of the world. And as the icing on the cake, Beth received the award for Favorite Song at the People's Choice Awards in '77. Back then, that was a big deal. Kiss was on tour during the telecast of the People's Choice Awards, so the ceremony played a videotaped thank you speech from the band. It was actually Lydia Criss that accepted the award on behalf of her husband Peter and his bandmates, Paul, Gene, and Ace.
Obviously, Beth is my favorite song, not only because it's how Peter feels about me, but how every man feels when he's away from the woman he loves.
The mega success for Beth was bittersweet for Kiss. The song has been the source of mudslinging between Kiss's dynamic duo, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, and the cast-aside drummer. And both Simmons and Stanley refused to acknowledge that Criss had anything to do with the writing of the band's biggest American single. Actually, in his autobiography, Simmons recounted that he had never seen Criss compose a single song. In Simmons' words, after listening to Pendridge's original demo, it's clear who made that song. Stanley had a similar position, assessing that Pendridge was the main author and Criss was just clamoring for attention. He said that he's never written a song. Criss shot back at his ex-band compadres, accusing Stanley and Simmons of being jealous that the main vocalists and leaders of the group didn't write their greatest success. After a half-a-decade run as one of rock's most formidable bands, Kiss were coming apart at the seams in late 1979 because of the internal strife between Criss, Simmons, and Stanley. Frehley and Criss expressed a desire to quit the band in 1978, so the 4 band members decided to take an extended break instead, hoping that the time apart would rejuvenate everyone's spirits. It did not. Kiss reunited for the Dynasty album that was released in May of '79, but the corresponding tour was the nail in the coffin for Peter Criss. The drummer had multiple onstage altercations with Paul Stanley, even threw his drumsticks at Gene Simmons during one show, hitting the serpent-tongued guitarist in the head. Following the drumstick throwing incident, Stanley, Simmons, and Frehley soon fired Peter Criss, replacing him with Eric Carr in the 1980s Unmasked Tour. Criss returned to the group for their very successful original lineup reunion tour in '96, along with a tour for Psycho Circus in '98, and the so-called farewell tour in '99 and 2000. Criss's last show at the formative Kiss lineup in 2000 ended with him angrily destroying his drum kit after discovering that he was being paid $10,000 less per show than Ace Frehley. The feud between Criss and Stanley and Simmons continued, and Kiss was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2014. Paul and Gene refused to reunite with the core lineup and ultimately decided not to perform at the Hall of Fame ceremony. And most recently, Beth was held out of the History documentary in 2021. Another battle in the Peter Criss versus modern-day Kiss war. Even with all this, Beth is still performed by the band in concert to this day.
I'll be right on to you.
It's one of those ballads that, while massive, is out of sync with the rest of their repertoire. But to me, that's what makes it so compelling. It is a beautifully arranged, symphonic 70s power ballad that has influenced so much in that vein that came after. I mean, you can definitely hear its influence in everything from Home Sweet Home by Motley Crue
But my heart's of gold.
to Sister Christian by Night Ranger and beyond.
The Christian, oh, the time has come.
Beth continues to divide fans of Kiss as well as the band itself. And a song that has that kind of power, either way, it's worth the listen. Leave us a comment about Beth. What are your memories of this song? What are your feelings about it? What are your thoughts on the controversy of who wrote it? Let's talk all things Kiss below. If you like our content, make sure that you subscribe to this channel below right now to be a part of this community. We're always talking music. It's great fun. And make sure to check out our latest on Patreon and our merch. That helps us keep the music alive, and that's the whole idea. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.